Hello. Welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog, and today we are finishing The Man Who Laughs by Victor Hugo, starting with part 2, book the 8th, chapter 8. But first, reading updates. I finished, okay, so I was reading Womb City during reading sprints. I did finish it. It's fine. I gave it a 2.75 stars. The beginning of it, I had a lot of promise for me, a lot of really cool commentary. It was a cool, futuristic, scary world that we were part of, and then it just kept taking whiplash turns, and it wasn't for me anymore. So I did finish it. It was an arc. It comes out in January. I also finished another book. I finished the Britney Spears book, Sorry for the Glare. That's obnoxious. There we go. The Woman in Me. It's fine. I would recommend it if you were already planning on reading it, read it. But if you were like, I don't know if I should read it, maybe I'll see if it's life changing. You don't. It's not life changing. Um, like the story that she has to say is interesting, but it's pretty much like timeline stuff. Like doesn't go too much into details or too much into emotions. So, if that's what you were hoping for, no. But if you were already planning on reading it, then read it. If you're like, I'm a Britney fan, I want to know everything about her, then there you go. I did also start a new book. I am not very far into it, but I started my first ever Stephen King book. It's The Eyes of the Dragon, and I'm reading it because a Stephen King book won for the best horror book in 2023, and Stephen King is intimidating. So I was recommended to read this one first. So again, I'm not very far into it. I'm on page 39, but I'm on I'm on chapter 14. It reads pretty fast and pretty easy breezy. I'm so much in the beginning that I can't really tell you what it's about, but it is about this family, this royal family, this king who has two sons, and how so far what's happening is this like jester or magician, I'm not quite sure what he is, but he doesn't want the eldest son to be king. He wants the second son to be king. So he's like doing all these little plottings. Again, I'm barely into the book, but that's what I got so far, and I'm enjoying it. Other books I picked up from the library, Wayward by Amelia Hart. It won for best debut author and also best historical fiction. I know absolutely nothing about it, so I can't tell you anything, but it looks pretty and there's a bird on it. So I'm excited to read that one. I not in front of me, but I have another advanced readers book that I need to read before January 16th, which is when it comes out, and it is a nonfiction book about witch trials throughout the world. So I'm excited for that one. And I also have, oh, I can't grab it. Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, which I need to read before January 21st because that's when our first book club is for patrons. Very exciting. And then, of course, I got some books as gifts. I have a nonfiction book, Saving Time, Discovering a Life Beyond the Clock, and it is about consumerism, capitalism, all those things. I'm sure some existential dread is gonna hop in here, but I have this one ready for me. And I have The Future by pretty. The Future by Naomi Alderman. I read her other book, The Power, which is a science fiction world where women are in power and some women have this like electricity that they can like zap people. It's really cool. That was a terrible description of it, but it's a really good book and like one of my favorites. So I'm excited to see what this one is. And then I have some graphic novels. Volume 11 of Saga. Man, we are just looping in with the glare. Here we go. We'll go over here. Volume of 11 of Saga. I love Saga just so much. So I'm really excited to hop into this one. And it's like the actual just trade, so it'll be a fast one. And then for the last 4 years, I have gotten the next compendium for The Walking Dead. And last year I got the fourth one, which is the last one. So I was like, well, oh well, guess I just have to focus on Saga. I was wrong. I have a new compendium, and I'm excited. It's Invincible. Oh man, I immediately forgot where we were going. Invincible! So I'm excited for it. It is a show. I watched the first season, super enjoyed it. It's very brutal, just like every Robert Kirkman book ever. But I'm really excited to read it. It is like a superhero world, but very questionable morals. So I'm excited to also get into those. So lots of reading. Lots of reading. But today the plan is to finish The Man Who Laughs. So what happened last time? Well, well. We had our good friend Gwynplaine slash Lord Freemain Clan Charlie stand up to all of the aristocracy and say, no, we shouldn't be putting into law that we should get more money. In fact, let me tell you a tale. And then he just talks about how, like, when he was little, he was sort of just like ignored by the aristocracy, and the people that brought him in were vagabonds and people who were blind and deformed and all of these other things. And just saying, like, we need to help people because they are starving, because their winters are actually cold, and all of these things, this tirade. And as he's going along, he gets a little choked up when he starts talking about Ursus, who's basically his dad, and Dea, who's basically his sister, but also his wife. Um, and when he does that, he like lets out accidentally a little laugh. And so the aristocracy all thinks that it's a big joke. So then they just start laughing the whole time while Gwynplaine is trying to talk over them and be like, no, it's not a joke. Like, you might think that because I'm deformed, like, I'm the outlier, but I'm not. I'm the normal one. Y'all are the outlier. And of course, nobody listens. So that was the like huge thing, was him like standing up and being like, I'm gonna change the world because they actually don't know what it's like, and I do. And if they just knew what it was like, then they'll change everything. And of course, that's not what happened. Of course, that's not what happened. So that's where, well, so they didn't even get to go through all of the people like saying whether it should be put into a law or not, because it was just chaos. Everybody was laughing hysterically. So they adjourned early, and when Gwynplaine leaves, he does not bow to the throne. How dare he? And I think that is the last thing that we read. Yeah, the officials who remained observed with astonishment that the peer had gone out without bowing to the throne. Terrible. Okay, so let's just scootle on in, yeah? Let's do it. Chapter 8. He would be a good brother were he not a good son. There was no one in the gallery. Gwynplaine crossed the circular space from whence they had removed the armchair and the tables, and where there now remained no trace of his investiture. Candelabra and lustres, played at certain intervals, marked the way out. Thanks to the string of light, he retraced without difficulty through the suite of saloons and galleries, the way which he had followed on his arrival with the king at arms and the usher of the black rod. He saw no one, except here and there some old lord with tardy steps, plodding along heavily in front of him. Suddenly, in the silence of those great deserted rooms, bursts of indistinct exclamations reached him, a sort of nocturnal clatter unusual in such a place. He directed his steps to the place whence this noise proceeded, and found himself in a spacious hall, dimly lighted, which was one of the exits from the House of Lords. He saw a great glass door open, a flight of steps, footmen and links, a square outside, and a few coaches waiting at the bottom of the steps. This was the spot from which the noise which he had heard had proceeded. Within the door and under the hall lamp was a noisy group in a storm of gestures and voices. Gwynplaine approached in the gloom. They were quarreling. On one side there were 10 or 12 young lords who wanted to go out, and on the other a man with his hat on, like themselves, upright and with a haughty brow, who barred their passage. Who was this man? Tom Jim Jack. Some of these lords were still in their robes, others had thrown them off and were in their usual attire. Tom Jim Jack wore a hat with plumes, not white, like the peers, but green-tipped with orange. He was embroidered and laced from head to foot, had flowing bows of ribbon and lace round his wrists and neck, and was feverishly fingering with his left hand the hilt of the sword which hung from his waist-belt, and on the billets and scabbards of which were embroidered an admiral's anchor. It was he who was speaking and addressing the young lords, and Gwynplaine overheard the following. "I have told you, you cowards. You wish me to withdraw my words. Be it so. You are not cowards. You are idiots. You all combined against one man. There was not cowardice. All right. Then it was stupidity. He spoke to you, and you did not understand him. Here, the old are hard of hearing, the young devoid of intelligence. I am one of your own order to quite sufficient extent to tell you the truth. This newcomer is strange, and he has uttered a heap of nonsense, I admit, but amidst all that nonsense there was some things which were true. His speech was confused, undigested, ill-delivered. Be it so, he repeated, you know, too often, but a man who was but yesterday a clown at a fair cannot be expected to speak like Aristotle or like Dr. Gilbert Burnet, Bishop of Salisbury. The vermin, the lions, the address to the underclerks, all that was in bad taste. Zounds, who says it wasn't? It was senseless and fragmentary and topsy-turvy harangue. But here and there came out facts which were true. And in no small thing to speak even as he did, seeing it is not his trade. I should like to see you do it too. Yes, you. What he said about the lepers at Burton Lazar's is an undeniable fact. Besides, he is not the first man who has talked nonsense. In fine, my lords, I do not like to see many set upon me. Such is my humour, and I ask your lordship's permission to take offence. You have displeased me. I am angry. I am grateful to God for having drawn up from the depths of his low existence this peer of England, and for having given back his inheritance to the heir, and, without heeding whether it will or will not affect my own affairs, I consider it a beautiful sight to see an insect transformed into an eagle, and Gwynplaine into Lord Clancharlie. My lords, I forgive you holding any opinion but mine. I regret that Lord Louis Duras should not be here. I should like to insult him. My lords, it is Fermain Clancharlie who has been the peer, and you who have been the mountebanks. As to his laugh, it is not his fault, as you have laughed at that laugh. Men should not laugh at misfortune. If you think that people cannot laugh at you as well, you are very much mistaken. You are ugly. You are badly dressed. My Lord Haversham, I saw your mistress the other day. She is hideous. A duchess, but a monkey. Gentlemen who laugh, I repeat that I should like to hear you try to say 4 words running. Many men jabber, very few speak. You imagine you know something, because you have kept idle terms at Oxford or Cambridge, and because, before being peers of England on the benches of Westminster, you have been asses on the benches at Gonville and Caius. Here I am, and I choose to stare you in the face. You have just been imprudent to this new peer. A monster, certainly, but a monster given up to beasts. I had rather be that man than you. I was present at the sitting. In my place, as a possible heir to a peerage, I heard all. I have not the right to speak, but I have the right to be a gentleman. Your jeering airs annoyed me. When I am angry, I would go up to Mount Pendlehill and pick the cloudberry which brings the thunderbolt down on the gatherer. That is the reason why I have waited for you at the door. We must have a few words, for we have arrangements to make. Did it strike you that you failed a little in respect towards myself? My lords, I entertain a firm determination to kill a few of you. All you who are here, Thomas Tufton, Earl of Thanet, Savage, Earl Rivers, Charles Spencer, Earl of Sunderland, Lawrence Hyde, Earl of Rochester, you barons, Grey of Rollston, Carey Hundson, Escrick, Rockingham, Little Carteret, Robert Darcy, Earl of Holderness, William Viscount Hutton, and Ralph Duke of Montagu, and any who choose, I, David Deary Moore, an officer of the fleet, summon, call, and command you to provide yourselves in all haste with seconds and umpires, and I will meet you face to face and hand to hand tonight, at once, tomorrow, by day or night, by sunlight or by candlelight, where, when, or how you please, so long as there is 2 sword lengths space, and you will do well to look to the flints of your pistols and the edges of your rapiers, for it is my firm intention to cause vacancies in your peerages. Ogle Cavendish, take your measures, and think of your motto, Cavendo tutus. Marmaduke Langdale, you will do well, like your ancestor Grindold, to order a coffin to be brought with you. George Booth, Earl of Warrington, you will never again see the county palatine of Chester, or your labyrinth like that of Crete, or the high towers of Dunham Massey. As to Lord Vaughan, he is young enough to talk impertinently, and too old to answer for it. I shall demand satisfaction for his words of his nephew, Richard Vaughan, Member of Parliament of the Borough and Merioneth. As for you, John Campbell, Earl of Greenwich, I will kill you as Etchin killed Mattis, but with a fair cut and not from behind, it being my custom to present my heart and not my back to the point of the sword. I have spoken my mind, my lords. I have spoken my mind. And so use witchcraft if you like, consult the fortune tellers, grease your skins with ointments and drugs to make them invulnerable, hang round your necks charms of the devil or of the Virgin. I will fight you blessed or cursed, and I will not have you searched to see if you are wearing any wizard's tokens, on foot or on horseback, on the high ground if you wish it, in Piccadilly or at Charing Cross, and they shall take up the pavement for our meeting, as they unpaved the court of the Louvre for the duel between Guise and Bassompierre. All of you, do you hear? I mean to fight you all. Dorm, Earl of Carnarvon, I will make you swallow your sword up to the hilt, as Morlos did Lyle Marivaux, and then we shall see, my lord, whether you will laugh or not. You, Burlington, who look like a girl of 17, you shall choose between the lawn of your house in Middlesex and your beautiful garden at Lounsborough in Yorkshire to be buried in. I beg to inform your lordships that it does not suit me to allow your insolence in my presence. I will chastise you, my lords. I will take it ill that you should have ridiculed Lord Fermain Clancharlie. He is worth more than you. As Clancharlie, he has nobility, which you have. As Gwynplaine, he has intellect, which you have not. I will make his cause my cause. Insult to him, insult to me, and your ridicule my wrath. We shall see who will come out of this affair alive, because I challenge you to the death. Do you understand? With any arm in any fashion, and you shall choose the death that pleases you best. And since you are clowns as well as gentlemen, I proportion my defiance to your qualities, and I give you your choice of any way in which a man can be killed, from the sword of the prince to the fist of the blackguard. To this furious onslaught of words, the whole group of young noblemen answered by a smile. Agreed, they said. I choose pistols, said Burlington. "Aye," said Escrick, "the ancient combat of the lists, with the mace and the dagger." "Aye," said Holderness, "the duel with two knives, long and short, stripped to the waist and breast to breast." "Lord David," said the Earl of Thanet, "you are a Scot. I choose the claymore." "I the sword," said Rockingham. "I," said Duke Ralph, "prefer the fists. 'Tis noblest." Gwynplaine came out of the shadow. He directed his steps towards him whom he had hitherto called Tom Jim Jack, but in whom now, however, he began to perceive something more. "I thank you," said he, "but this is my business." Every head turned towards him. Gwynplaine advanced. He felt himself impelled towards the men whom he heard called Lord David, his defender, and perhaps something nearer. Lord David drew back. "Oh," said he, "it is you, is it? This is well timed. I have a word for you as well. Just now you spoke of a woman who, after having loved Lord Linnaeus Clancharlie, loved Charles II. "It is true." "Sir, you insulted my mother." "Your mother?" cried Gwynplaine. "In that case, as I guessed, we are—" "Brothers," answered Lord David, and he struck Gwynplaine. "We are brothers," said he, "so we can fight. One can only fight one's equal. Who is one's equal if not one's brother? I will send you my seconds tomorrow. Tomorrow we will cut each other's throats." End of the chapter and end of book. Okay, so after Gwynplaine's huge speech, he leaves the room and he sees that Tom Jim Jack, who is actually Lord David, who is actually his brother, is talking to all of the barons and all of the lords and being like, all right, you guys didn't listen to him at all. Because what he's saying, like, yeah, a lot of it was weird and rubbish and, like, didn't really make sense and didn't flow nicely and whatever, but that's because, like, the day before he was literally a traveling performer and he doesn't know how to do that. But what he was saying was true. In each area that he was talking about, there is ruin, and each of you have not dealt with that. And because you laughed at him, obviously you have to fight all of you because you're idiots. And the barons are like, all right, we'll fight you. And then each of them is choosing like how they're going to fight him, which I think is hilarious. And then Gwynplaine comes out and Gwynplaine is like, thank you, but this is my fight, not yours. And Lord David is like, dude, you insulted my mom. Enough with the mom jokes. And because we're equals, we're going to fight now. Let's do it. And that's where it ends. And now we are in book the ninth, which is the last book. It's called In Ruins. Chapter 1. It is through excess of greatness that man reaches excess of misery. As midnight tolled from St. Paul's, a man who had just crossed London Bridge struck into the lanes of Southwark. There were no lamps lighted, it being at that time the custom in London, as in Paris, to extinguish the public lamps at 11 o'clock. That is, to put them out just as they became necessary. The streets were dark and deserted. When the lamps were out, men stay in. He whom we speak of advanced with hurried strides. He was strangely dressed for walking at such an hour. He wore a coat of embroidered silk, a sword by his side, a hat with white plumes, and no cloak. The watchmen, as they saw him pass, said, "It is a lord walking for a wager," and they moved out of his way with the respect due to a lord and to a better. The man was Gwynplaine. He was making his escape. Where was he? He did not know. We have said that the soul has its cyclones, fearful whirlwinds, in which heaven, the sea, day, night, life, death, are all mingled in unintelligible horror. It can no longer breathe truth. It is crushed by things in which it does not believe. Nothingness becomes hurricane. The firmament pales. Infinity is empty. The mind of the sufferer wanders away. He feels himself dying. He craves for a star. What did Gwynplaine feel? A thirst. A thirst to see Dea. He felt but that. To reach the green box again and the Tadcaster Inn, with its sounds and lights, full of the cordial laughter of the people, to find Ursus and the wolf, to see Dea again, to re-enter life. Disillusion like a bow. Like a bow. I never know if it's bow or if it's bow, and I always say the wrong one. I'm like, this is going to be the one where it's this, and it never is. Disillusion, like a bow, shoots its arrow. Man towards the truth. Gwynplaine hastened on. He approached Terenzzo Field. He walked no longer now. He ran. His eyes pierced the darkness before him. His glance preceded him, eagerly seeking the harbor on the horizon. What a moment for him when he should see the lighted windows of Tadcaster Inn. He reached the bowling green. He turned the corner of the wall and saw before him, at the end of the field, some distance off, the inn, the only house, it may be remembered, in the field where the fair was held. He looked. There was no light, nothing but a black mass. He shuddered. Then he said to himself that it was late, that the tavern was shut up, that it was very natural, that everyone was asleep, that he had only to awaken Nicholas or Govicum, that he must go up to the inn and knock at the door. He did so, running no longer now, but rushing. He reached the inn, breathless. It is when, storm-beaten and struggling in the invisible convulsions of the soul until he knows not whether he is in life or in death, that all the delicacy of a man's affection for his loved ones, being yet unimpaired, proves a heart true. When all else is swallowed up, tenderness still floats unshattered. Not to awaken Dea too suddenly was Gwynplaine's first thought. He approached the inn with as little noise as possible. He recognized the nook, the old dog kennel where Govicum used to sleep. In it, contiguous to the lower room, was a window opening onto the field. Gwynplaine tapped softly at the pane. It would be enough to awaken Govicum, he thought. There was no sound in Govicum's room. At his age, said Gwynplaine, a boy sleeps soundly. With the back of his hand he knocked against the window gently. Nothing stirred. He knocked louder, twice. Still, nothing stirred. Then, feeling somewhat uneasy, he went to the door of the inn and knocked. No one answered. He reflected and began to feel a cold shudder come over him. Master Nicholas is old. Children sleep soundly, and old men heavily. Courage. Louder. And he tapped. He had knocked. He had kicked the door. Now he flung himself against it. This recalled to him a distant memory of Weymouth, when, a little child, he had carried Dea, an infant, in his arms. He battered the door again violently, like a lord, which, alas, he was. The house remained silent. He felt that he was losing his head. He no longer thought of caution. He shouted, "Nicholas! Govicum!" At the same time he looked up at the windows to see if any candle was lighted, but the inn was blank. Not a voice, not a sound, not a glimmer of light. He went to the gate and knocked at it, kicked against it, and shook it, crying out loudly, "Ursus! Homo!" The wolf did not bark. A cold sweat stood in drops upon his brow. He cast his eyes around. The night was dark, but there were stars enough to render the fair green visible. He saw, a melancholy sight to him, that everything on it had vanished. There was not a single caravan. The circus was gone. Not a tent, not a booth, not a cart remained. The strollers, with their 1,000 noisy cries, who had swarmed there, had given place to a black and sullen void. All were gone. The madness of anxiety took possession of him. What did this mean? What had happened? Was no one left? Could it be that life had crumpled away behind him? What had happened to them all? Good heavens! Then he rushed like a tempest against the house. He struck the small door, the gate, the windows, the window shutters, the walls, with fists and feet, furious with terror and agony of mind. He called Nicholas, Govicum, Phoebe, Venus, Ursus, the wolf. He tried every shout and every sound against this wall. At times he waited and listened, but the house remained mute and dead. Then, exasperated, he began again with blows, shouts, and repeated knockings, re-echoed all around. He might have been thunder trying to awake the grave. There is a certain stage of fright in which a man becomes terrible. He who fears everything fears nothing. He would strike the Sphinx. He defies the unknown. Gwynplaine renewed the noise in every possible form, stopping, resuming, unwearying in the shouts and appeals by which he assailed the tragic silence. He called 1,000 times on the names of those who should have been there. He shrieked out every name except that of Dea, a precaution of which he could not have explained the reason himself, but which instinct inspired even in his distraction. Having exhausted calls and cries, nothing was left but to break in. I must enter the house, said he to himself. But how? He broke a pane of glass in Govicum's room by thrusting his hand through it, tearing the flesh. He drew the bolt of the sash and opened the window. Perceiving that his sword was in the way, he tore it off angrily, scabbard, blade, and belt, and flung it on the pavement. Then he raised himself by the inequalities of the wall, and though the window was narrow, he was able to pass through it. He entered the inn. Govicum's bed, dimly visible in its nook, was there, but Govicum was not in it. If Govicum was not in bed, it was evident that Nicholas could not be in his. The whole house was dark. He felt in that shadowy interior the mysterious immobility of emptiness, and that vague fear which signifies, there is no one here. Gwynplaine, convulsed with anxiety, crossed the lower room, knocking against the tables, upsetting the earthenware, throwing down the benches, sweeping against the jugs, and, striding over the furniture, reached the door leading into the court, and broke it open with one blow from his knee, which sprung the lock. The door turned on its hinges. He looked into the court. The green box was no longer there. End of chapter 1. Okay, so Gwynplaine / Fermain Clan Charlie has left the home and is finally going back to the Tadcaster Inn to speak with Ursus, to let him know that everything that has happened, it's been I don't even know how much time, not very much time. But he's going back to talk to Ursus, to talk to Dea, all of these things, get back to some sort of realness and be like, guys, I'm a royal. So he's running back to the Tadcaster Inn, and when he gets there, there's no lights. There's no sound. Nothing is happening. And so he's knocking on the doors. Nobody's coming. He's shouting people's names. Nobody's answering. He's tapping on the window panes, everything. There is no sound at all. No lights coming on. Nothing. And so he's like, that's odd. I need to get in. So he breaks a window, which, of course, is ripping his skin, like he's getting cuts all over. He breaks a window, he gets through. He is having a hard time getting through, like his blade is like stopping him from actually getting in, so he just like rips it off, throws it on the ground. He takes a tumble into the Tadcaster Inn, and so he's like getting himself up, and Govicum's not in his bed. And he knows that if Govicum's not in his bed, that means that Nicholas isn't in his bed. So he runs through the inn to go to the green box, which is basically like where he used to live with Ursus and Dea and Vivi and Venus, and it's not there. Where could it have gone? Which we already know that Barkilphedro came, was like, you need to leave, you're being illegal. If you don't leave, we're going to kill your wolf, which is terrible. So of course they leave. And they also have to vacate every other place. So that's what the mention of like the circus tent being gone and like all of these other vagabonds and traders and performers are also, they've all been kicked out. They're all gone. And all of this happened while Gwynplaine was away. So he didn't know any of this. Cool. Chapter 2. The Dregs. Gwynplaine left the house and began to explore Tarrinzeau Field in every direction. He went to every place where, the day before, the tents and caravans had stood. He knocked at the stalls, though he knew well that they were uninhabited. He struck everything that looked like a door or a window. Not a voice arose from the darkness. Something like death had been there. The anthill had been raised. Some measures of police had apparently been carried out. There had been what, in our days, would have been called a razzia. Tarrinzeau Field was worse than a desert. It had been scoured, and every corner of it scratched up, as it were, by pitiless claws. The pocket of the unfortunate fair green had been turned inside out and completely emptied. Gwynplaine, after having searched every yard of ground, left the green, struck into the crooked streets, abutted on the site called East Point, and directed his steps towards the Thames. He had threaded his way through a network of lanes, bounded only by walls and hedges, when he felt the fresh breeze from the water, heard the dull lapping of the river, and suddenly saw a parapet in front of him. It was the parapet of the Ifroc stone. This parapet bounded a block of the quay, which was very short and very narrow. Under it, the high wall, the Ifroc stone, buried itself perpendicularly in the dark water below. Gwynplaine stopped at the parapet and, leaning his elbows on it, laid his head in his hands and set to thinking, with the water beneath him. Did he look at the water? No. At what then? The shadow. Not the shadow without, but within him. In the melancholy night-bound landscape which he scarcely marked, in the outer depth which his eyes did not pierce, were the blurred sketches of masts and spars. Below the Ifroc stone there was nothing on the river, but the quay sloped insensibly downwards, till, some distance off, it met a pier, at which several vessels were lying, some of which we had just arrived, others which were on the point of departure. These vessels communicated with the shore by little jetties, constructed for the purpose, some of stone, some of wood, or by movable gangways. All of them, whether moored to the jetties or at anchor, were wrapped in silence. There was neither voice nor movement on board, it being a good habit of sailors to sleep when they can and awake only when wanted. If any of them were to sail during the night at high tide, the crews were not yet awake. The hulls, like large black bubbles, and the rigging, like threads mingled with ladders, were barely visible. All was livid and confused. Here there a red cresset pierced the haze. Gwynplaine saw nothing of this. What he was musing on was destiny. He was in a dream, a vision, giddy in presence of inexorable reality. He fancied that he heard behind him something like an earthquake. It was the laughter of the lords. From that laughter he had just emerged. He had come out of it, having received a blow, and from whom? From his own brother. Flying from the laughter, carrying with him the blow, seeking refuge, a wounded bird in his nest, rushing from hate and seeking love, what had he found? Darkness. No one. Everything gone. He compared that darkness to the dream he had indulged in. What a crumbling away. Gwynplaine had just reached that sinister bound, the void. The green box gone with his universe vanished. His soul had been closed up. He reflected. What could have happened? Where were they? They had evidently been carried away. Destiny had given him Gwynplaine, a blow which was greatness. Its reaction had struck them another, which was annihilation. It was clear that he would never see them again. Precautions had been taken against that. They had scoured the fair green, beginning by Nicholas and Govicum, so that he should gain no clue through them. Inexorable dispersion. That fearful social system, at the same time that it had pulverized him in the House of Lords, had crushed them in their cabin. They were lost. Dea lost, lost to him forever. Darkness of heaven, where was she? And he had not been there to defend her. To have to make guesses as to the absent whom we love, is to put oneself to the torture. He inflicted this torture on himself. At every thought that he fathomed, at every supposition which he made, he felt within him a moan of agony. Through a succession of bitter reflections, he remembered a man who was evidently fatal to him, and who had called himself Barkilphedro. That man had inscribed on his brain a dark sentence which reappeared now. He had written it in such terrible ink that every letter had turned to fire, and Gwynplaine saw flaming at the bottom of his thought the enigmatical words, the meaning of which was at length solved. Destiny never opens one door without closing another. All was over. The final shadows had gathered about him. In every man's fate there may be an end of the world for himself alone. It is called despair. The soul is full of falling stars. This, then, was what he had come to. A vapor had passed. He had been mingled with it. It had lain heavily on his eyes. It had disordered his brain. He had been outwardly blinded, intoxicated within. This had lasted the time of a passing vapor. Then everything melted away, the vapor and his life. Awaking from the dream, he found himself alone. All vanished, all gone, all lost. Night, nothingness. Such was his horizon. He was alone. Alone has a synonym, which is dead. Despair is an accountant. It sets itself to find its total. It adds up everything, even to the farthing. It reproaches heaven with its thunderbolts and its pinpricks. It seeks to find what it has to expect from fate. It argues, weighs, and calculates, outwardly cool, while the burning lava is still flowing on within. Gwynplaine examined himself, and examined his fate. The backward glance of thought, terrible recapitulation. When at the top of a mountain, we look down the precipice. When at the bottom, we look up at heaven. And we say, I was there. Gwynplaine was at the very bottom of misfortune. How sudden, too, had been his fall. Such is the hideous swiftness of misfortune, although it is so heavy that we might fancy it slow. But no, it would likewise appear that snow, from its coldness, ought to be the paralysis of winter, and from its whiteness, the immobility of the winding sheet. Yet this is contradicted by the avalanche. The avalanche is snow become a furnace. It remains frozen, but it devours. The avalanche had enveloped Gwynplaine. He had been torn like a rag, uprooted like a tree, precipitated, like a stone. He recalled all the circumstances of his fall. He put himself questions and returned answers. Grief is an examination. There is no judge so searching as conscience conducting its own trial. What amount of remorse was there in his despair? This he wished to find out, and dissected his conscience. Excruciating vivisection. His absence has caused a catastrophe. Had his absence depended on him? In all that had happened, had he been a free agent? No. He had felt himself captive. What was that which had arrested and detained him? A prison? No. A chain? No. What then? Sticky slime. He had sunk into the slough of greatness. To him, to whom has it not happened to be free in appearance, yet to feel that his wings are hampered? There had been something like a snare spread from him. What is at first temptation ends by captivity. Nevertheless, and his conscience pressed him on this point, had he merely submitted to what had been offered him? No, he had accepted it. Violence and surprise had been used with him in a certain measure, it was true, but he, in a certain measure, had given in. To have allowed himself to be carried off was not his fault, but to have allowed himself to be inebriated was his weakness. There had been a moment, a decisive moment, when the question was proposed. This Barkilphedro had placed a dilemma before Gwynplaine, and had given him clear power to decide his fate by a word. Gwynplaine might have said no. He had said yes. From that yes, uttered in a moment of dizziness, everything had sprung. Gwynplaine realized this now in the bitter aftertaste of that consent. Nevertheless, for he debated with himself, was it then so great a wrong to take possession of his right, of his patrimony, of his heritage, of his house, and, as a patrician of the rank of his ancestors, as an orphan of the name of his father, what had he accepted? A restitution. Made by whom? By Providence. Then his mind revolted. Senseless acceptance. What a bargain had he struck! What a foolish exchange! He had trafficked with Providence at a loss. How now, for an income of £80,000 a year, for 7 or 8 titles, for 10 or 12 palaces, for houses in town and castles in the country, for 100 lackeys, for packs of hounds and carriages, and armorial bearings, to be a judge and legislator, for a coronet and purple robes, like a king, to be a baron and a marquis, to be a peer of England, he had given the hut of Ursus and the smile of Dea. For a shipwreck and destruction in the surging immensity of greatness, he had bartered happiness. For the ocean he had given the pearl. Oh, madman! Oh, fool! Oh, dupe! Yet, nevertheless, and here the objection reappeared on firmer ground, in this fever of high fortune which had seized him all had not been unwholesome. Perhaps there would have been selfishness in renunciation. Perhaps he had done his duty in the acceptance. Suddenly transformed into a lord, what ought he have done? The complication of events produces perplexity of mind. This had happened to him. Duty gave contrary orders. Duty on all sides at once. Duty multiple and contradictory. This was the bewilderment which he had suffered. It was this that had paralyzed him, especially when he had not refused to take the journey from Corleone Lodge to the House of Lords. What we call rising in life is leaving the safe for the dangerous path, which is, thenceforth, the straight line. Towards whom is our first duty? Is it towards those nearest to ourselves, or is it towards mankind generally? Do we not cease to belong to our own circumscribed circle, and become part of the great family of all? As we ascend, we feel an increased pressure on our virtue. The higher we rise, the greater is the strain. The increase of right is an increase of duty. We come to many crossways, phantom roads perchance, and we imagine that we see the finger of conscience pointing each one of them out to us. Which shall we take? Change our direction? Remain where we are? Advance? Go back? What are we to do? That there should be crossroads in conscience is strange enough, but responsibility may be a labyrinth. And when a man contains an idea, when he is in the incarnation of a fact, when he is in a symbolic man, at the same time that he is a man of flesh and blood, is not the responsibility still more oppressive? thence the care-laden docility and the dumb anxiety of Gwynplaine, thence his obedience when summoned to take his seat. A pensive man is often a passive man. He had heard what he fancied was the command of duty itself. Was not that entrance into a place where oppression could be discussed and resisted the realization of one of his deepest aspirations? When he had been called upon to speak, he, the fearful human scantling, he, the living specimen of the despotic whims under which, for 6,000 years, mankind has groaned in agony, had he the right to refuse? Had he the right to withdraw his head from under the tongue of fire descending from on high to rest upon him? In the obscure and giddy debate of conscience, what had he said to himself? This: the people are a silence. I will be the mighty advocate of that silence. I will speak for the dumb. I will speak of the little to the great, of the weak to the powerful. This is the purpose of my fate. God's will. God wills what he wills, and does it. It was a wonder that Hardquanon's flask, in which was the metamorphosis of Gwynplaine into Lord Clancharlie, should have floated for 15 years on the ocean, on the billows, in the surf, through the storms, and that all the raging of the sea did it no harm. But I can see the reason. There are destinies with secret springs. I have the key of mine, and know its enigma. I am predestined. I have a mission. I will be the poor man's lord. I will speak for the speechless with despair. I will translate inarticulate remonstrances. I will translate the mutterings, the groans, the murmurs, the voices of the crowd, their ill-spoken complaints, their unintelligible words, and those animal-like cries which ignorance and suffering put into men's mouths. The clamor of men is as inarticulate as the howling of the wind. They cry out, but they are understood, so that cries become equivalent to silence, and silence with them means throwing down their arms. This forced disarmament calls for help. I will be their help. I will be the denunciation. I will be the word of the people. Thanks to me, they shall be understood. I will be the bleeding mouth from which the gag has been torn. I will tell everything. This will be great indeed. Yes, it is fine to speak for the dumb, but to speak to the deaf is sad, and that was his second part of the drama. Alas, he had failed irremediably. The evolution in which he had believed, the high fortune, had melted away like a mirage, and what a fall, to be drowned in a surge of laughter. He had believed himself strong, he who, during so many years, had floated with observant mind on the wide sea of suffering, he who had brought out of the great shadow so touching a cry. He had been flung against that huge rock, the frivolity of the fortunate. He believed himself an avenger. He was but a clown. He thought that he wielded the thunderbolt. He did not. He did but tickle. In place of emotion, he met with mockery. He sobbed. They burst into gaiety, and under that gaiety he had sunk fatally submerged. And what had they laughed at? At his laugh. So that trace of a hateful act, of which he must keep the mark forever. Mutilation carved in everlasting gaiety, the stigmata of laughter, image of the sham contentment of nations under their oppressors. That mask of joy produced by torture, that abyss of grimace which he carried on his features, the scar which signified jussu regis, the attestation of a crime committed by the king towards him, and the symbol of crime committed by royalty towards the people. That it was which had triumphed over him, that it was which had overwhelmed him, so that the accusation against the executioner turned into sentence upon the victim. What a prodigious denial of justice! Royalty, having had satisfaction of his father, had had satisfaction of him. The evil that had been done had served as pretext, and as motive for the evil which remained to be done. Against whom were the lords angered? Against the torturer? No, against the tortured. Here is the throne, there the people. Here James II, there Gwynplaine. That confrontation indeed brought to light an outrage of a crime. What was the outrage? Complaint. What was the crime? Suffering. Let misery hide itself in silence, otherwise it becomes treason. And those men who had dragged Gwynplaine on the hurdle of sarcasm, were they wicked? No, but they, too, had their fatality. They were happy. They were executioners, ignorant of the fact. They were good-humored. They saw no use in Gwynplaine. He opened himself to them. He tore out his heart to show them, and they cried, "Go on with your play." But the sharpest sting, he had laughed himself. The frightful chain which tied down his soul hindered his thoughts from rising to his face. His disfigurement reached even his senses, and while his conscience was indignant, his face gave it the lie, and jested. Then all was over. He was the laughing man, the caryatid of the weeping world. He was in agony, petrified in hilarity, carrying the weight of a universe of calamity, and walled up forever with the gaiety, the ridicule, and the amusement of others. Of all the oppressed, of whom he was the incarnation, he partook the hateful fate to be a desolation not believed in. They jeered at his distress. To them he was but an extraordinary buffoon, lifted out of some frightful condensation of misery, escaped from his prison, changed to a deity, risen from the dregs of the people to the foot of the throne, mingled with the stars, and who, having once amused the damned, now amused the elect. All that was in him of generosity, of enthusiasm, of eloquence, of heart, of soul, of fury, of anger, of love, of inexpressible grief, ended in a burst of laughter. And he proved, as he had told the lords, that this was not the exception, but that it was the normal, ordinary, universal, unlimited, sovereign fact, so amalgamated with the routine of life that they took no account of it. The hungry pauper laughs. The beggar laughs. The felon laughs. The prostitute laughs, the orphan laughs to gain his bread, the slave laughs, the soldier laughs, the people laugh. Society is so constituted that every perdition, every indignance, every catastrophe, every fever, every ulcer, every agony is resolved on the surface of the abyss into one frightful grin of joy. Now he was that universal grin, and that grin was himself. The law of heaven, the unknown power which governs, had willed that a spectre visible and palpable, a spectre of flesh and bone, should be the synopsis of the monstrous parody which we call the world, and he was that spectre, immutable fate. He had cried, "Pity for those who suffer." In vain. He had striven to awake pity. He had awakened horror. Such is the law of apparitions. But while he was a spectre, he was also a man. Here was the heart-rending complication. A spectre without, a man within. A man more than any other, perhaps, since his double fate was the synopsis of all humanity, and he felt that humanity was at once present in him and absent from him. There was in his existence something insurmountable. What was he? A disinherited heir? No, for he was a lord. Was he a lord? No, for he was a rebel. He was the light bearer, a terrible spoil-sport. He was not Satan, certainly, but he was Lucifer. His entrance with his torch in his hand was sinister. Sinister for whom? For the sinister. Terrible for whom? To the terrible. Therefore they rejected him. Enter their order. Be accepted by them. Never. The obstacle which he carried in his face was frightful, but the obstacle which he carried in his ideas was still more insurmountable. His speech was to them more deformed than his face. He had no possible thought in common with the world of the great and powerful, in which he had by a freak of fate been born, and from which another freak of fate had driven him out. There was between men and his face a mask, and between society and his mind a wall. In mixing from infancy a wandering mountebank with that vast and tough substance which is called the crown, in saturating himself with the attraction of the multitude, and impregnating himself with the great soul of mankind, he had lost, in the common sense of the whole of mankind, this particular sense of the reigning classes. On their heights he was impossible. He had reached them wet with water from the well of truth. T, truth. The odor of the abyss was on him. He was repugnant to those princes perfumed with lies. To those who live on fiction, truth is disgusting, and he who thirsts for flattery vomits the real, when he had happened to drink it by mistake. That which Gwynplaine brought was not fit for their table. For what was it? Reason, wisdom, justice, and they rejected him with disgust. There were bishops there. He brought God into their presence. Who was this intruder? The two poles repel each other. They can never amalgamate, for transition is wanting, hence the result. A cry of anger when they were brought together in terrible juxtaposition, all misery concentrated in a man, face to face with all the pride concentrated in a caste. To accuse is useless. To state is sufficient. Gwynplaine, meditating on the limits of his destiny, proved the total uselessness of his effort. He proved the deafness of high places. The privileged have no hearing on the side next the disinherited. Is it their fault? Alas, no. It is their law. Forgive them. To be moved would be to abdicate. Of lords and princes expect nothing. He who is satisfied is inexorable. For those that have their fill, the hungry do not exist. The happy ignore and isolate themselves. On the threshold of their paradise, as on the threshold of hell, must be written, "Leave all hope behind." Gwynplaine had met with the reception of a spectre entering the dwelling of the gods. Here all that was within him rose in rebellion. No, he was not a spectre. He was a man. He told them, he shouted to them, that he was a man. He was not a phantom. He was a palpitating flesh. He had a brain, and he thought. He had a heart, and he loved. He had a soul, and he hoped. Indeed, to have hoped overmuch was his whole crime. Alas, he had exaggerated hope into believing in that thing at once so brilliant and so dark which is called society. He who was without had re-entered it. It had at once and at first sight made him its three offers, and given him its three gifts: marriage, family, and caste. Marriage. He had seen prostitution on the threshold. Family. His brother had struck him, and was awaiting him the next day, a sword in hand. Caste. It had burst into laughter in his face, at him the patrician, at him the wretch. It had rejected almost before it had admitted him, so that his first 3 steps into the dense shadow of society had opened 3 gulfs beneath him. And it was by a treacherous transfiguration that his disaster had begun, and catastrophe had approached him with the aspect of apotheosis. Ascend had signified descend. His fate was the reverse of Job's. It was through prosperity that adversity had reached him. Oh, tragical enigma of life! Behold what pitfalls! A child, he had wrestled against the night, and had been stronger than it. a man he had wrestled against destiny and had overcome it. Out of disfigurement he had created success, and out of misery, happiness. Of his exile he had made an asylum. A vagabond, he had wrestled against space, and like the birds of the air he had found his crumb of bread. Wild and solitary he had wrestled against the crowd, and had made it his friend. An athlete he had wrestled against that lion, the people, and he had tamed it. Indignant he had wrestled against distress, he had faced the dull necessity of living, and from amalgamating with misery every joy of his heart, he had at length made riches out of poverty. He had believed himself the conqueror of life. Of a sudden, he was attacked by fresh forces reaching him from unknown depths. This time, with menaces no longer, but with smiles and caresses. Love, serpent-like and sensual, had appeared to him, who was filled with angelic love. The flesh had tempted him, who had lived on the ideal. He had heard words of voluptuousness, like cries of rage. He had felt the clasp of a woman's arm, like the convulsions of a snake. To the illumination of truth had succeeded the fascination of falsehood. For it is not the flesh that is real, but the soul. The flesh is ashes, the soul is flame. For the little circle allied to him by the relationship of poverty and toil, which was his true and natural family, had been substituted the social family, his family in blood, but of tainted blood, and even before he had entered it, he found himself face to face with an intended fracturicide. Alas, he had allowed himself to be thrown back into that society of which Brantome, whom he had not read, wrote, "The son has a right to challenge his father." A fatal fortune had cried to him, "Thou art not of the crown, thou art of the chosen," and had opened the ceiling above his head like a trap in the sky, and had shot him up through this opening, causing him to appear wild and unexpected in the midst of princes and masters. Then suddenly he saw around him, instead of the people who applauded him, the lords who cursed him. Mournful metamorphosis, ignominious ennobling, rude spoliation of all that had been his happiness, pillage of his life by derision. Gwynplaine, Clancharlie, the Lord, the Mountebank, torn out of his old lot, out of his new lot, by the beaks of those eagles. What availed it that he had commenced life by immediate victory over obstacle? Of what good had been his early triumphs? Alas, the fall must come ere destiny be complete. So, half against his will, half of it, because after he had done with the wapentake, he had to do with Barkilphedro, and he had given a certain amount of consent to his abductions. He had left the real for the chimerical, the true for the false, Dea for Hosiana, love for pride, liberty for power, labor proud and poor for opulence full of unknown responsibilities, the shade in which is God for the lurid flames in which the devils dwell, paradise for Olympus. He had tasted the golden fruit. He was now spitting out the ashes to which it turned. Lamentable result. Defeat, failure, fall into ruin, insolent expulsion of all his hopes, frustrated by ridicule, immeasurable disillusion. And what was there for him in the future? If he looked forward to the morrow, what did he see? A drawn sword, the point of which was against his breast, and the hilt of the hand of his brother. He could see nothing but the hideous flash of that sword. Hosiana and the House of Lords made up the background in a monstrous chiaroscuro, full of tragic shadows. And that brother seemed so brave and chivalrous. Alas, he had hardly seen the Tom Jim Jack who had defended Gwynplaine. the Lord David who had defended Lord Clancharlie, but he had had time to receive a blow from him and to love him. He was crushed. He felt it impossible to proceed further. Everything had crumpled around him. Besides, what was the good of it? All the weariness dwells in the depths of despair. The trial had been made. It could be renewed. Gwynplaine was like a gamester who has played all his trumps away, one after the other. He had allowed himself to be drawn to a fearful gambling table, without thinking what he was about. For, so subtle is the poison of illusion, he had staked Dea against Hosiana, and had gained a monster. He had staked Ursus against a family, and had gained an insult. He had played his mountebank platform against his seat in the Lords. For the applause which was his, he had gained insult. His last card had fallen on that fatal green cloth, the deserted bowling green. Gwynplaine had lost. Nothing remained but to pay. Pay up, wretched man. The thunder-stricken lie still. Gwynplaine remained motionless. Anybody perceiving him from afar in the shadow, stiff and without movement, might have fancied that he saw an upright stone. Hell, the serpent, and reverie are torturous. Gwynplaine was descending the sepulchral spirals of the deepest thought. He reflected on that world of which he had just caught a glimpse with the icy contemplation of a last look. Marriage, but no love. Family, but no brotherly affection. Riches, but no conscience. Beauty, but no modesty. Justice, but no equity. Order, but no equilibrium. Authority, but no right. Power, but no intelligence. Splendor, but no light. Inexorable balance sheet. He went throughout the supreme vision in which his mind had been plunged. He examined successfully destiny, situation, society, and himself. What was destiny? A snare. Situation? Despair. Society? Hatred. And himself? A defeated man. In the depths of his soul he cried, "Society is the stepmother. Nature is the mother. Society is the world of the body. Nature is the world of the soul. The one tends to the coffin, to the deal box in the grave, to the earthworms, and ends there. The other tends to expanded wings, to transformation into the morning light, to ascent into the firmament, and there revives into new life." By degrees a paroxysm came over him, with a sweeping surge. At the close of events there is always a last flash, in which all stands revealed once more. He who judges meets the accused face to face. Gwynplaine reviewed all that society and all that nature had done for him. How kind had nature been to him! How she, who is the soul, had secured him! All had been taken from him, even his features. The soul had given him all back, all, even his features, because there is on earth a heavenly blind girl made expressly for him, who saw not his ugliness, and who saw his beauty. And it was from this that he had allowed himself to be separated, from that adorable girl, from his own adopted one, from her tenderness, from her divine blind gaze, the only gaze on earth that saw him, that he had strayed. Dea was his sister, because he felt between them the grand fraternity of above, the mystery which contains the whole of heaven. Dea, when he was a little child, was his virgin, because every child has his virgin, and at the commencement of life a marriage of souls is always consummated in the plenitude of innocence. Dea was his wife, for theirs was the same nest of the highest branch of the deep-rooted tree of Hymen. Dea was still more. She was his light, for without her all was void and nothingness, and for him her head was crowned with rays. What would become of him without Dea? What could he do with all that was himself? Nothing in him could live without her. How, then, could he have lost sight of her for a moment? Oh, unfortunate man! He allowed distance to intervene between himself and his star, and by the unknown and terrible laws of gravitation in such things, distance is immediate loss. Where was she? The star. Dea. Alas, he had lost her light. Take away the star, and what is the sky? A black mass. But why, then, had all this befallen him? Oh, what happiness had been his! For him God had remade Eden. Too close was the resemblance, alas, even to allowing the serpent to enter. But this time it was the man who had been tempted. He had been drawn without, and then, by a frightful snare, had fallen into a chaos of murky laughter, which was hell. Oh, grief! How frightful seemed all that had fascinated him. That Hosiana, fearful creature, half beast, half goddess. Gwynplaine was now on the reverse side of his elevation, and he saw the other aspect of that which had dazzled him. It was baleful. His peerage was deformed, his coronet was hideous, his purple robe a funeral garment, those palaces infected, those trophies, those statues, those armorial bearings sinister, and unwholesome and treacherous air poisoned those who breathed it and turned them mad. How brilliant the rags of the mountebank! Gwynplaine appeared to him now. Alas, where was the green box? Poverty, joy, the sweet wandering life, wandering together like the swallows. They never left each other then. He saw her every minute, morning, evening. At their table their knees, their elbows touched. They drank from the same cup. The sun shone through the pane, but it was only the sun, and Dea was love. At night they slept not far from each other, and the dream of Dea came and hovered over Gwynplaine, and the dream of Gwynplaine spread itself mysteriously above the head of Dea. When they awoke, they could never quite be sure that they had not exchanged kisses in the azure mists of dreams. Dea was all innocence, Ursus all wisdom. They wandered from town to town, and they had for provision and for stimulant the frank, loving gaiety of the people. They were angel vagabonds, with enough of humanity to walk the earth, and not enough of wings to fly away, and now all had disappeared. Where was it gone? Was it possible that it was all effaced? What wind from the tomb had swept over them? All was eclipsed, all was lost. Alas, power irresistible and deaf to appeal, which weighs down the poor, flings its shadows over all, and is capable of anything. What had been done to them? And he had not been there to protect him, to fling himself in front of them, to defend them, as a lord and with his title, his peerage and his sword, as a mountebank with his fists and his nails. And here arose a bitter reflection, perhaps the most bitter of all. Well, no. He could not have defended them. It was he himself who had destroyed them. It was to save him, Lord Clancharlie, from them. It was to isolate his dignity from contact with them, that the infamous omnipotence of society had crushed them. The best way in which he could protect them would be to disappear, and then the cause of their persecution would cease. He out of the way, they would be allowed to remain in peace. Into what icy channel was his thought beginning to run? Oh, why had he allowed himself to be separated from Dea? Was not his first duty towards her to serve and to defend the people? But Dea was the people. Dea was an orphan. She was blind. She represented humanity. Oh, what had they done to them? Cruel smart of regret. His absence had left the field free for the catastrophe. He would have shared their fate. Either they would have been taken and carried away with him, or he would have been swallowed up with them. And now, what would have become of him without them? Gwynplaine, without Dea. Was it possible? Without Dea was to be without everything. It was all over now. The beloved group was forever buried in irreparable disappearance. All was spent. Besides, condemned and damned as Gwynplaine was, what was the good of further struggle? He had nothing more to expect either of men or of heaven. Dea! Where is Dea? Lost. What, lost? He who has lost his soul can regain it, but through one outlet. Death. Gwynplaine, tragically distraught, placed his hand firmly on the parapet, as on a solution, and looked at the river. It was his third night without sleep. Fever had come over him. His thoughts, which he believed to be clear, were blurred. He felt in imperative need of sleep. He remained for a few instants, leaning over the water. Its darkness offered him a bed of boundless tranquillity in the infinity of shadow, sinister temptation. He took off his coat, which he folded and placed on the parapet. Then he unbuttoned his waistcoat. As he was about to take it off, his hand struck against something in his pocket. It was the red book, which had been given him by the librarian of the House of Lords. He drew it from his pocket, examined it in the vague light of the night, and found a pencil in it, with which he wrote on the first blank that he found these 2 lines: I depart. Let my brother David take my place, and may he be happy. Then he signed Fermain Clancharlie, peer of England. He took off his waistcoat, and placed it upon the coat. Then his hat, which he placed upon the waistcoat. In the hat he laid the red book open on the page on which he had written. Seeing a stone laying on the ground, he picked it up and placed it in the hat. Having done all of this, he looked up into the deep shadow above him. Then his head sank slowly, as if drawn by an invisible thread towards the abyss. There was a hole in the masonry near the base of the parapet. He placed his foot in it, so that his knee stood higher than the top, and scarcely an effort was necessary to spring over it. He clasped his hands behind his back and leaned over. So be it, said he. And he fixed his eyes on the deep waters. Just then he felt a tongue licking his hands. He shuddered and turned around. The wolf was behind him. End of the chapter. End of the book. Okay, so that was a long one. That was a long one. But Gwynplaine, Fermain Clancharlie, goes back. He finds everything empty, and he just feels so incredibly lost. He doesn't have anything now. He left thinking that, he would have a better life, that he would be able to have a better life and also bring Ursus and Dea with him, and realize that, of course, that wasn't the case. And of course, he was complicit in his abduction by going with the Wapentake, by saying yes to Barkilphedro. Like, there was so many little steps that he didn't realize were big steps, and he just kept going with them. And he thought that he could make all of this change because with great power comes great responsibility. But he saw that that's not the case, that people in higher power, yeah, they definitely know what's going on, and they don't care because they're fed. They don't care about people who aren't being fed. They're happy. They don't care about people who aren't happy and can't find their next meal. Like, they just don't care about that, and that is not what Gwynplaine wants. Like, he sees, like, the curtain drawn, and he's like, oh, it's not that they don't know, they just don't care at all. Got it. And that's not how it should be, type of a thing. So he goes back, and he's just so lost, and because he doesn't have his anchor of his family, his found family, he's in darkness, and being alone to him means death. And he's contemplating all of this by a body of water, and he starts, like, undressing. He takes off his waistcoat. He finds a little book in his pocket, and he basically writes, like, I'm leaving. Everything should be left to Lord David. He should have the title, he should have everything, basically. And as he's about to jump over, he gets a little lick on his little hand. And it's the wolf. So he stops, and it's great. I was a little worried. Things were getting rough, and I was like, "Oh no." Like he has to find his family. I don't know if the story is going to be like happy, but like maybe a little something, like a little twinge of hope would be nice. That would be great. I mean, it might be too much to ask for from this author, given the other books that he has written, but I just I just want it. We all know that I don't love happy endings. So for me to be like, can just little smidgens of happy, just little sprinkles, like it's a big thing. I love when things are dark. I love when things are desperate. But I didn't want it that way. Like I didn't want Gwynplaine to like jump off the bridge. I didn't want that. It can be dark and desperate another way. And what is more dark and desperate than having nothing, but still just having like the tiniest bit of hope that isn't real? Although rebellion is built on hope. Thank you for that, Star Wars. Let's do it. Conclusion. The conclusion is titled The Night and the Sea. Chapter 1. A watchdog may be a guardian angel. Gwynplaine uttered a cry. Is that you, Wolf? Homo wagged his tail. His eyes sparkled into the darkness. He was looking earnestly at Gwynplaine. Then he began to lick his hands again. For a moment, Gwynplaine was like a drunken man, so great is the shock of hope's mighty return. Homo, what an apparition! During the last 48 hours he had exhausted what might be termed every variety of the thunderbolt. But one was left to strike him, the thunderbolt of joy. And it had just fallen upon him. Certainty, or at least the light which leads to it, regained. The sudden intervention of some mysterious clemency possessed, perhaps, by destiny. Life saying, "Behold me!" in the darkest recesses of the grave. The very moment in which all expectation has ceased, bringing back health and deliverance. A place of safety discovered at the most critical instant in the midst of crumbling ruins. Homo was all this to Gwynplaine. The wolf appeared to him in a halo of light. Meanwhile, the wolf had turned round. He advanced a few steps, and then looked back to see if Gwynplaine was following him. Gwynplaine was doing so. Homo wagged his tail and went on. The road taken by the wolf was the slope of the quay of the Ifrock stone. This slope shelved down to the Thames, and Gwynplaine, guided by the wolf, descended it. Homo turned his head now and then to make sure that Gwynplaine was behind him. In some situations of supreme importance, nothing approaches so near an omniscient intelligence as the simple instinct of a faithful animal. An animal is a lucid somnambulist. There are cases in which the dog feels that he should follow his master, others in which he should precede him. Then the animal takes the direction of sense. His imperturbable scent is a confused power of vision in what is twilight to us. He feels a vague obligation to become a guide. Does he know that there is a dangerous pass, and that he can help his masters to surmount it? Probably not. Perhaps he does. In any case, someone knows it for him. As we have already said, it often happens in life that some mighty help which we have held to have come from below has, in reality, come from above. Who knows all the mysterious forms assumed by God? What was this animal? Providence. Having reached the river, the wolf led down the narrow tongue of land which bordered the Thames. Without noise or bark, he pushed forward on his silent way. Homo always followed his instinct and did his duty, but with the pensive reserve of an outlaw. Some 50 paces more, and he stopped. A wooden platform appeared on the right. At the bottom of this platform, which was a kind of wharf on piles, a black mass could be made out, which was a tolerably large vessel. On the deck of the vessel, near the prow, was a glimmer, like the last flicker of a nightlight. The wolf, having finally assured himself that Gwynplaine was there, bounded on to the wharf. It was a long platform, floored and tarred, supported by a network of joists, and under which flowed the river. Homo and Gwynplaine shortly reached the brink. The ship moored to the wharf was a Dutch vessel of the Japanese build, with 2 decks, fore and aft, and between them an open hold, reached by an upright ladder, in which the cargo was laden. There was thus a forecastle and an afterdeck, as in our old river boats, and a space between them ballasted by the freight. The paper boats made by children are of a somewhat similar shape. Under the decks were the cabins, the doors of which opened into the hold and were lighted by glazed portholes. In stowing the cargo, a passage was left between the packages of which it consisted. These vessels had a mast on each deck. The foremast was called Paul, the mainmast Peter. The ship being sailed by these 2 masts, as the church was guided by her 2 apostles. A gangway was thrown, like a Chinese bridge, from one deck to the other, over the center of the hold. In bad weather, both flaps of the gangway were lowered, on the right and left, on hinges, thus making a roof over the hold, so that the ship, in heavy seas, was hermetically closed. These sloops, being of very massive construction, had a beam for a tiller, the strength of the rudder being necessarily proportioned to the height of the vessel. 3 men, the skipper, and 2 sailors, with a cabin boy, sufficed to navigate these ponderous sea-going machines. The decks, fore and aft, were, as we have already said, without bulwarks. The great lumbering hull of this particular vessel was painted black, and on it, visible even in the night, stood out, in white letters, the words Voegrat, Rotterdam. About that time many events had occurred at sea, and amongst others, the defeat of the Baron de Ponty's 8 ships off Cape Carnero, which had driven the whole French fleet into refuge at Gibraltar, so that the channel was swept of every man of war, and merchant vessels were able to sail backwards and forwards between London and Rotterdam without a convoy. The vessel on which was to be read the word Voegrat, and which Gwynplaine was now close to, lay with her main deck almost level with the wharf. But 1 step to descend, and Homo in a bound, and Gwynplaine in a stride, were on board. The deck was clear, and no stir was perceptible. The passengers, if, as was likely, there were any, were already on board. The vessel being ready to sail, and the cargo stowed, was as apparent from the state of the hold, which was full of bales and cases. But they were, doubtless, lying asleep in the cabins below, as the passage was to take place during the night. In such cases the passengers do not appear on deck till they awake the following morning. As for the crew, they were probably having their supper in the men's cabin, whilst awaiting the hour fixed for sailing, which was now rapidly approaching, hence the silence on the 2 decks connected by the gangway. The wolf had almost run across the wharf. Once on board, he slackened his pace into a discreet walk. He still wagged his tail, no longer joyfully, however, but with the sad and feeble wag of a dog troubled in his mind. Still preceding Gwynplaine, he passed along the afterdeck and across the gangway. Gwynplaine, having reached the gangway, perceived a light in front of him. It was the same that he had seen from the shore. There was a lantern on the deck, close to the foremast, by the gleam of which was sketched in black, on the dim background of the night, what Gwynplaine recognized to be Ursus's old four-wheeled van. This poor wooden tenement, cart and hut combined, in which his childhood had rolled along, was fastened to the bottom of the mast by thick ropes, of which the knots were visible at the wheels. Having been so long out of service, it had become dreadfully rickety. It leant over feebly on one side. It had become quite paralytic from disuse, and, moreover, it was suffering from that incurable malady, old age. Mouldy and out of shape, it tottered in decay. The materials of which it was built were all rotten. The iron was rusty, the leather torn, the woodwork worm-eaten. There were lines of cracks along the window in front, through which shone a ray from the lantern. The wheels were warped, the lining, the floor, and the axle-trees seemed worn out with fatigue. Altogether, it presented an indescribable appearance of beggary and prostration. The shafts, stuck up, looked like two arms raised to heaven. The whole thing was in a state of dislocation. Beneath it was hanging the wolf's chain. Does it not seem that the law and the will of nature would have dictated Gwynplaine's headlong rush to throw himself upon life, happiness, love regained? So they would, except in some case of deep terror, such as his. But he who comes forth, shattered in nerve and uncertain of his way, from a series of catastrophes, each one like a fresh betrayal, is prudent even in his joy, hesitates lest he should bear the fatality of which he has been the victim to those whom he loves, feels that some evil contagion may still hang about him, and advances towards happiness with wary steps. The gates of paradise reopen, but before he enters he examines his ground. Gwynplaine, staggering under the weight of his emotion, looked around him, while the wolf went and lay down silently by his chain. End of chapter 1. Okay, so Gwynplaine has been led by the wolf to the ship where Ursus, Dea, all of them are gonna ship out. And he gets there, and it appears that everybody's sleeping because nobody's on deck. And the wolf just like gets him there. He makes sure that he's on the ship, and then he like goes and lays down. And then Gwynplaine is just like left there, and we'll see how this reunion goes. Chapter 2. Barkilphedro, having aimed at the eagle, brings down the dove. Ooh, interesting. The step of the little van was down, the door ajar. There was no one inside. The faint light which broke through the pane in front sketched the interior of the caravan vaguely in melancholy. The inscriptions of Ursus, glorifying the grandeur of lords, showed distinctly on the worn-out boards, which were both the wall without and the wainscot within. On a nail near the door, Gwynplaine saw his esclavine and his cape hung up, as they hang up the clothes of a corpse in a dead house. Just then he had neither waistcoat nor coat on. Behind the van something was laid out on the deck at the foot of the mast, which was lighted by the lantern. It was a mattress, of which he could make out one corner. On this mattress someone was probably lying, for he could see a shadow move. Someone was speaking. Concealed by the van, Gwynplaine listened. It was Ursus's voice. That voice, so harsh in its upper and so tender in its lower pitch. That voice, which had so often upbraided Gwynplaine, and which had taught him so well, had lost the life and clearness of its tone. It was vague and low, and melted into a sigh at the very end of every sentence. It bore but a confused resemblance to his natural and firm voice of old. It was the voice of one in whom happiness is dead. A voice may become a ghost. He seemed to be engaged in monologue rather than in conversation. We are already aware, however, that soliloquy was a habit with him. It was for that reason that he passed for a madman. Gwynplaine held his breath, so as not to lose a word of what Ursus said, and this was what he heard. There's a very dangerous kind of craft, because there are no bulwarks to it. If we were to slip, there is nothing to prevent our going overboard. If we have bad weather, we shall have to take her below, and that will be dreadful. An awkward step, a fright, and we shall have a rapture of an aneurysm. I have seen instances of it. Oh my God, what is to become of us? Is she asleep? Yes, she's asleep. Is she in a swoon? No, her pulse is pretty strong. She's only asleep. Sleep is a reprieve. It is the happy blindness. What can I do to prevent people walking around here? Gentlemen, if there be anybody on deck, I beg of you to make no noise. Do not come near us, if you do not mind. You know a person in delicate health requires a little attention. She is feverish, you see. She is very strong. 'Tis a little creature who is rather feverish. I put this mattress down here so that she may have a little air. I explain all this so that you should be careful. She fell down exhausted on the mattress as if she had fainted. But she is asleep. I do hope that no one will wake her. I address myself to the ladies, if there are any present. A young girl. It is pitiful. We are only poor mountebanks, and I beg a little kindness, and if there is anything to pay for not making a noise, I will pay it. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Is there anyone there? No, I don't think there is. My talk is mere loss of breath. So much the better. Gentlemen, I thank you if you are there, and I thank you still more if you are not. Her forehead is all in perspiration. Come, let us take our places in the galleys again. Put on the chain. Misery is come back. We are sinking again. A hand, the fearful hand which we cannot see, but the weight of which we feel ever upon us, has suddenly struck us back towards the dark point of our destiny. Be it so. We will bear up. Only I will not have her ill. I must seem a fool to talk aloud like this when I am alone, but she must feel she has someone near her when she wakes. What shall I do if someone wakens her suddenly? No noise, in the name of heaven. A sudden shock which would awake her suddenly would be of no use. It will be a pity if anybody comes by. I believe that everyone on board is asleep, thanks be to Providence for that mercy. Well, and Homo? Where is he, I wonder? In all this confusion, I forgot to tie him up. I do not know what I am doing. It is more than an hour since I have seen him. I suppose he has been to look for his supper somewhere ashore. I hope nothing has happened to him. Homo struck his tail softly on the planks of the deck. There you are. Oh, there you are. Thank God for that. If Homo had been lost, it would have been too much to bear. She has moved her arm. Perhaps she is going to awake. Quiet, Homo. The tide is turning. We shall sail directly. I think it will be a fine night. There is no wind. The flag droops. We shall have a good passage. I do not know what moon it is, and there is scarcely a stir in the clouds. There will be no swell. It will be a fine night. Her cheek is pale. It is only weakness. No, it is flushed. It is only the fever. Stay. It is rosy. She is well. I can no longer see clearly. My poor wolf, I no longer see clearly. So we must begin life afresh. We must set to work again. There are only we two left, you see. We will work for her, both of us. She is our child. Ah, the vessel moves. We are off. Goodbye, London. Goodbye, evening. Good night. To the devil with horrible London. He was right. He heard the dull sound of the unmooring as the vessel fell away from the wharf. Abaft, on the poop, a man, the skipper, no doubt, just come from below, was standing. He had slipped the hawser and was working the tiller, looking only to the rudder as befitted the combined phlegm of a Dutchman and a sailor, listening to nothing but the wind and the water, bending against the resistance of the tiller as he worked it to port or starboard, as he looked in the gloom of the afterdeck like a phantom bearing a beam upon its shoulder. He was alone there. So long as they were in the river, the other sailors were not required. In a few minutes, the vessel was in the center of the current, with which she drifted without rolling or pitching. The Thames, little disturbed by the ebb, was calm. Carried onwards by the tide, the vessel made rapid way. Behind her, the black scenery of London was fading in the mist. Ursus went on talking. Never mind, I will give her digitalis. I am afraid that delirium will supervene. She perspires in the palms of her hands. What sin can we have committed in the sight of God? How quickly has all this misery come upon us, hideous rapidity of evil. A stone falls, it has claws. It is the hawk swooping on the lark. It is destiny. There you lie, my sweet child. One comes to London, one says, what a fine city, what fine buildings. Southwark is a magnificent suburb. One settles there. But now they are horrid places. What would you have me do there? I am going to leave. This is the 30th of April. I always distrusted the month of April. There are but 2 lucky days in April, the 5th and the 27th, and 4 unlucky ones, the 10th, the 20th, the 29th, and the 30th. This has been placed beyond doubt by the calculations of Cardan. I wish this day were over. Departure is a comfort. At dawn we shall be at Gravesend, and tomorrow evening at Rotterdam. Zounds, I will begin life again in the van. We will draw it, won't we? A light tapping announced the wolf's consent. Ursus continued. If one could only get out of a grief as one gets out of a city, Homo, we must yet be happy. Alas, there must always be the one who is no more. A shadow remains on those who survive. You know whom I mean, Homo. We were 4, and now we are but 3. Life is but a long loss of those whom we love. They leave behind them a train of sorrows. Destiny amazes us by a prolixity of unbearable suffering. Who then can wonder what the old are garrulous? It is despair that makes the dotard old fellow, Homo. The wind continues favorable. We can no longer see the dome of St. Paul's. We shall pass Greenwich presently. That will be 6 good miles over. Ugh, I turn my back forever on those odious capitals, full of priests, of magistrates, and of people. I prefer looking at the leaves rustling in the woods. Her forehead is still in perspiration. I don't like those great violet veins on her arms. There is fever in them. Oh, all this is killing me. Sleep, my child. Yes, sleep. Here a voice spoke, in an ineffable voice, which seemed from afar and appeared to come at once from the heights of the depths. A voice divinely fearful. The voice of Dea. All that Gwynplaine had hitherto felt seemed nothing. His angel spoke. It seemed as though he had heard words spoken from another world in a heaven-like trance. The voice said, "He did well to go. This world was not worthy of him, only I must go with him. Father, I am not ill. I heard you speak just now. I am very well, quite well. I was asleep, Father. I am going to be happy." "My child," said Ursus in a voice of anguish, "what do you mean by that?" The answer was, "Father, do not be unhappy." There was a pause, as if to take breath, and then these few words, pronounced slowly, reached Gwynplaine. "Gwynplaine is no longer here. It is now that I am blind. I knew not what night was. Night is absence." The voice stopped once more, and then continued. "I always feared that he would fly away. I felt that he belonged to heaven. He has taken flight suddenly. It was natural that it should end thus. The soul flies away like a bird, but the nest of the soul is in height. There dwells the great lodestone, who draws all towards him. I know where to find Gwynplaine. I have no doubt about the way. Father, it is yonder. Later on you will rejoin us, and Homo too." The wolf, hearing his name pronounced, wagged his tail softly against the deck. "Father," resumed the voice, "you understand that once Gwynplaine is no longer here, all is over. Even if I would remain, I could not, because one must breathe. We must not ask for that which is impossible. I was with Gwynplaine. It was quite natural. I lived. Now Gwynplaine is no more. I die. The two things are alike. Either he must come or I must go. Since he cannot come back, I am going to him. It is good to die. It is not at all difficult. Father, that which is extinguished here shall be rekindled elsewhere. It is a heartache to live in this world. It cannot be that we shall always be unhappy. When we go to what you call the stars, we shall marry. We shall never part again, and we shall love. Love. That is what is God." "There, there, do not agitate yourself," said Ursus. The voice continued. "Well, for instance, last year, In the spring of last year we were together, and we were happy. How different it is now. I forget what little village we were in, but there were trees, and I heard the linnets singing. We came to London. All was changed. This is no reproach, mind. When one comes to a fresh place, how is one to know anything about it? Father, do you remember that one day there was a woman in the great box? You said, 'It is a duchess.' I felt sad. I think it might have been better had we kept to the little towns. Gwynplaine has done right, with all. Now my turn has come. Besides, you have told me yourself that when I was very little my mother died, and that I was lying on the ground with the snow falling upon me, and that he, who was also very little then, and alone like myself, picked me up, and that it was thus that I came to be alive. So you cannot wonder that now I should feel it absolutely necessary to go and search the grave to see if Gwynplaine be in it. Because the only thing that exists in life is the heart, and the after-life the soul. You take notice of what I say, father, do you not? What is moving? It seems as if we are in something that is moving, yet I do not hear the sound of wheels." After a pause, the voice added, "I cannot exactly make out the difference between yesterday and today. I do not complain. I do not know what has occurred, but something must have happened." These words, uttered with deep and inconsolable sweetness, and with a sigh which Gwynplaine heard, wound up thus: "I must go, unless he should return." Ursus muttered gloomily. "I do not believe in ghosts," he went on. "This is a ship. You ask why the house moves. It is because we are on board a vessel. Be calm. We must not talk so much. Daughter, if you have any love for me, do not agitate yourself. It will make you feverish. I am so old, I could not bear it if you were to have an illness. Spare me. Do not be ill." Again the voice spoke. "What is the use of searching the earth when we can only find in heaven?" Ursus replied with a half attempt at authority. "Be calm. There are things when you have no sense at all. There are times when you have no sense at all. I order you to rest. After all, you cannot be expected to know what it is to rupture a blood vessel. I should be easy if you were easy. My child, do something for me as well. If he picked you up, I took you in. You will make me ill. That is wrong. You must calm yourself and go to sleep. All will come right. I give you my word of honor. All will come right. Besides, it is very fine weather. The night might have been made on purpose. Tomorrow we shall be in Rotterdam, which is a city in Holland, at the mouth of the Meuse." "Father," said the voice, "look here. When two beings have always been together from infancy, their state should not be disturbed, or death must come, and it cannot be otherwise. I love you all the same, but I feel that I am no longer altogether with you, although I am as yet not altogether with him." "Come, try to sleep," repeated Ursus. The voice answered, "I shall have sleep soon enough." Ursus replied in trembling tones, "I tell you that we are going to Holland, to Rotterdam, which is a city." "Father," continued the voice, "I am not ill. If you are anxious about that, you may rest easy. I have no fever. I am rather hot, but it is nothing more." Ursus stammered out, "At the mouth of the Meuse." "I am quite well, father. But look here, I feel that I am going to die." "Do nothing so foolish," said Ursus, and he added, "Above all, God forbid she should have a shock." There was a silence. Suddenly Ursus cried out, "What are you doing? Why are you getting up? Lie back down, I implore you." Gwynplaine shivered, and stretched out his hand. Nope. No, he didn't do that. Gwynplaine shivered and stretched out his head. Okay, so he's like peeking out. I was like, stretching out of your head sounds absolutely terrifying to witness. End of chapter 2. Okay, so Gwynplaine hears the voice of Ursus and the voice of Dea, and he's hiding behind their truck, and he's just like listening to them. And Ursus is just super upset and worried because Dea is really weak. She collapsed. She's feverish. He thinks that she's gonna get ill, and so like he's begging for anybody who's around to just like calm themselves and to not like surprise Dea, because that might like be the end of her. And Dea's like, "Oh, father, Without Gwynplaine, I can't be here. Gotta go. I'm not sick. I'm just gonna die. And Ursus is like, you're so silly. Shut up. And so all of this is happening. Gwynplaine is just listening to this, and then we hear that Dea is getting up, and Gwynplaine's like, sit back down. What are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And Gwynplaine, like, peeks his little head out, I guess, finally, but whatever. All right. Let's see. Chapter 3. Also, for a moment, I thought it was gonna be like a Romeo and Juliet type thing, where like, and I guess it still could be. I don't know the ending. This is just me guessing, so I'm not. This isn't a spoiler, but where like Dea's like, oh, woe is me. I can't live without Gwynplaine, and then she like dies from a broken heart, and then Gwynplaine is like, oh, well, I can't live without Dea, and then he dies, and it's just gonna be like that. And it's like, y'all, you just could have been together. You're right next to each other. Chapter 3. Paradise Regained Below. He saw Dea. She had just raised herself up on the mattress. She had on a long white dress, carefully closed, and showing only the delicate form of her neck. The sleeves covered her arms, the folds her feet, the branch-like tracery of blue veins, hot and swollen with fever, were visible on her hands. She was shivering and rocking, rather than reeling to and fro like a reed. The lantern threw up its glancing light on her beautiful face. Her loosened hair floated over her shoulders. No tear fell on her cheeks. In her eyes there was a fire and darkness. She was pale, with that paleness which she is like the transparency of a divine life in an earthly face. Her fragile and exquisite form was, as it were, blending and interfused with the folds of her robe. She wavered like the flicker of a flame, while, at the same time, she was dwindling into shadow. Her eyes, opened wide, were resplendent. She was as one just freed from the sepulchre, a soul standing in the dawn. Ursus, whose back only was visible to Gwynplaine, raised his arms in terror. "Oh, my child! Oh, heavens, she is delirious!" Delirium is what I feared worst of all. She must have no shock, for that might kill her. Yet nothing but a shock can prevent her going mad. Dead or mad, what a situation! Oh God, what can I do? My child, lie down again. Meanwhile, Dea spoke. Her voice was almost indistinct, as if a cloud already interposed between her and earth. Father, you are wrong. I am not in the least delirious. I hear all you say to me, distinctly. You tell me that there is a great crowd of people, that they are waiting, and that I must play tonight. I am quite willing. You see that I have my reason, but I do not know what to do, since I am dead, and Gwynplaine is dead. I am coming all the same. I am ready to play. Here I am, but Gwynplaine is no longer here. Come, my child, said Ursus, do as I bid you. Lie down again. He is no longer here. No longer here. Oh, how dark it is. Dark, muttered Ursus. This is the first time she has ever uttered that word. Gwynplaine, with as little noise as he could help making as he crept, mounted the step of the caravan, entered it, took from the nail the cape and the esclavine, put the esclavine round his neck, and redescended from the van, still concealed by the projection of the cabin, the rigging, and the mast. Dea continued murmuring. She moved her lips, and by degrees the murmur became a melody. In broken pauses, and with the interrupted cadences of delirium, her voice broke into the mysterious appeal she had so often addressed to Gwynplaine in Chaos Vanquished. She sang, and her voice was low and uncertain as the murmur of the bee. Noche quita, te de allí, el alba canta. There's a note, and it says, "Depart, O night," sings the dawn. She stopped. No, it is not true. I am not dead. What am I saying? Alas, I am alive. I am alive. He is dead. I am below. He is above. He is gone. I remain. I shall hear his voice no more, nor his footsteps. God, who has given us a little paradise on earth, has taken it away. Gwynplaine, it is over. I shall never fear never feel you near me again, never. And his voice, I shall never hear his voice again. And she sang, Es menester a cielos ir, deja quiero a tu negro caparazón. We must go to the heaven. Take off, I entreat thee, thy black cloak. She stretched out her hand as if she sought something in space on which she might rest. Gwynplaine, rising by the side of Ursus, who had suddenly become as though petrified, knelt down before her. Never, said Dea. Never shall I hear him again. She began wandering, to sing again, Deja quiero a tu negro caparazón. Then she heard a voice, even the beloved voice answering, O ven, ama, eres alma, soy corazón. O come and love, thou art the soul, I am the heart. And at the same instant Dea felt under her hand the head of Gwynplaine. She uttered an indescribable cry, Gwynplaine! A light as of a star shone over her pale face, and she tottered. Gwynplaine received her in his arms. Alive! cried Ursus. Dea repeated, Gwynplaine! And with her head bowed against Gwynplaine's cheek, she whispered faintly, You have come down to me again. I thank you, Gwynplaine. And seated on his knee, she lifted up her head. Wrapped in his embrace, she turned her sweet face towards him, and fixed on him those eyes so full of light and shadow, as though she could see him. It is you, she said. Gwynplaine covered her sobs with kisses. There are words which are at once words, cries, and sobs, in which all ecstasy and all grief are mingled, and burst forth together. They have no meaning, and yet tell all. Yes, yes, it is. It is I, Gwynplaine, of whom you are the soul. Do you hear me? I, of whom you are the child, the wife, the star, the breath of life. I, to whom you are eternity. It is I. I am here. I hold you in my arms. I am alive. I am yours. Oh, when I think that in a moment all would have been over, in 1 minute more, but for Homo. I will tell you everything. How near is despair to joy. Dea, we live. Dea, forgive me. Yes, yours forever. You are right. Touch my forehead. Make sure that it is I. For if you only knew, but nothing can separate us now. I rise out of hell and ascend into heaven. Am I not with you? You said that I descended. Not so. I reascend. Once more with you. Forever. I tell you forever. Together. We are together. Who would have believed it? We have found each other again. All our troubles are past. Before us now there is nothing but enchantment. We will renew our happy life, and we will shut the door so fast that misfortune shall never enter again. I will tell you all. You will be astonished. The vessel has sailed. No one can prevent that now. We are on our voyage and at liberty. We are going to Holland. We will marry. I have no fear about gaining a livelihood. What can hinder it? There is nothing to fear. I adore you. Not so quick, stammered Ursus. Dea, trembling, and with the rapture of an angelic touch, passed her hand over Gwynplaine's profile. He overheard her say to herself, It is thus that gods are made. Then she touched his clothes. This esclavine, she said, the cape, nothing is changed. All as it was before. Ursus, stupefied, delighted, smiling, drowned in tears, looked at them and addressed an aside to himself. I don't understand it in the least. I'm a stupid idiot, I, who saw him carried to the grave. I cry and I laugh. That is all I know. I am as great a fool as if I were in love myself. But that is just what I am. I am in love with them both. Old fool. Too much emotion. Too much emotion. It is what I was afraid of. No. It is that I wished for. Gwynplaine, be careful of her. Yes, let them kiss. It is no affair of mine. I am but a spectator. But what I feel is droll. I am the parasite of their happiness, and I am nourished by it. Whilst Ursus was talking to himself, Gwynplaine exclaimed, Dea, you are too beautiful. I don't know where my wits were gone these last few days. Truly, there is but you on earth. I see you again, but as yet I can hardly believe it. In this ship. But tell me, how did it all happen? To what estate have they reduced you? But where is the green box? They have robbed you. They have driven you away. It is infamous. Oh, I will avenge you. I will avenge you, Dea. They shall answer for it. I am a peer of England. Ursus, as if stricken by a planet full in his breast, drew back and looked at Gwynplaine attentively. It is clear that he is not dead, but can he have gone mad? And he listened to him doubtfully. Gwynplaine resumed, Be easy, Dea. I will carry you compliant. I will carry my complaint to the House of Lords. Ursus looked at him again and struck his forehead with the tip of his forefinger, then making up his mind. It is all one to me, he said. It will be all right all the same. Be as mad as you like, my Gwynplaine. It is one of the rights of man. As for me, I am happy. But how came all this about? The vessel continued to sail smoothly and fast. The night grew darker and darker. The mists, which came inland from the ocean, were invading the zenith, from which no wind blew them away. Only a few large stars were visible, and they disappeared one after another, so that soon there were none at all, and the whole sky was dark, infinite, and soft. The river broadened until the banks on each side were nothing but two thin brown lines mingling with the gloom. Out of all this shadow rose a profound peace. Gwynplaine, half-seated, held Dea in his embrace. They spoke, they cried, they babbled, they murmured in a mad dialogue of joy. How are we to paint thee, O joy? My life, my heaven, my love, my whole happiness. Gwynplaine. Dea, I am drunk. Let me kiss your feet. Please, no. No feet kissing here. Is it you, then, for certain? I have so much to say to you now that I do not know where to begin. One kiss. Oh, my wife. Gwynplaine, do not tell me that I am beautiful. It is you who are so handsome. I have found you again. I hold you to my heart. This is true. You are mine. I do not dream. Is it possible? Yes, it is. I recover possession of life. If you only knew, I have met with all sorts of adventures, Dea. Gwynplaine, I love you. And Ursus murmured, Mine is the joy of a grandfather. Homo, having come from under the van, was going from one to the other discreetly, exacting no attention, licking them left and right, now Ursus's thick shoes, now Gwynplaine's cape, now Dea's dress, now the mattress. This was his way of giving his blessing. They had passed Chatham and the mouth of Medway. They were approaching the sea. The shadowy serenity of the atmosphere was such that the passage down the Thames was being made without trouble. No maneuver was needful, nor was any sailor called on deck. At the other end of the vessel the skipper, still alone, was steering. There was only this man aft. At the bow the lantern lighted up the happy group of beings who, from the depths of misery, had suddenly been raised to happiness by a meeting so unhoped for. End of chapter 3. Okay, so chapter 3 was Gwynplaine still being a little weird in the shadows, and then Dea's like going a little loopy because she lost Gwynplaine, and she's like, oh, if we were to perform tonight in front of 1,000,000 people, I would believe it, and I would do it. And then she starts, like, singing from Chaos Vanquished, and Gwynplaine's like, I'm gonna be a little weirdo. And so he sneaks into the green box and, like, puts on his little cape that he wears in Chaos Vanquished, and then just, like, inserts himself into the spot where, like, that, like, moment where, like, the two lovers lock eyes or whatever. And he does that, and it's sickening in like a happiness way, and it's a lot. But yeah, and then they're like, oh, you're alive, blah blah blah, and they're like going back and forth, and then now Ursus thinks that Gwynplaine is crazy because he's like, well, I'm up here now, for I am a lord. Tell me your complaints, and I will pass it on to the House of Lords because I can do that. So, all right, last chapter. Are we ready? So they're all happy now. Is it going to end in a happy tale? Are they going to assume new identities in Holland and just continue performing? What's going on? Are they going to be, is Barkilphedro going to be like, well, excuse me, that can't happen. I don't know what's gonna happen. So, yeah, I really don't know where this is gonna go. We'll see. I guess I guess I should just keep reading and find out. I guess. Okay. Chapter 4. Nay on high. Suddenly Dea, disengaging herself from Gwynplaine's embrace, arose. She pressed both her hands against her heart, as if to still its throbbing. "What is wrong with me?" said she. "There is something the matter. Joy is suffocating. No, it is nothing. That is lucky. Your reappearance, O Gwynplaine, has given me a blow of happiness. All this heaven of joy which you have put into my heart has intoxicated me. You being absent, I felt myself dying. The true life which was leaving me you have brought back. I felt as if something was being torn away within me. It is the shadows that have been torn away, and I feel life dawn in my brain, a glowing life, a life of fever and delight. This life which you have just given me is wonderful. It is so heavenly that it makes me suffer somewhat. It seems as though my soul is enlarged and can scarcely be contained in my body. This life of seraphim, this plenitude, flows into my brain and penetrates it. I feel like a beating of wings within my breast. I feel strangely, but happy. Gwynplaine, you have been my resurrection." She flushed, became pale, then flushed again and fell. "Alas," said Ursus, "you have killed her." Gwynplaine stretched his arms towards Dea, extremity of anguish coming upon extremity of ecstasy. What a shock! He would himself have fallen, had he not had to support her. "Dea," he cried, shuddering, "what is the matter?" "Nothing," she said. "I love you." She lay in his arms, lifeless, like a piece of linen. Her hands were hanging down helplessly. Gwynplaine and Ursus placed Dea on the mattress. She said feebly, "I cannot breathe lying down." They lifted her up. Ursus said, "Fetch a pillow." She replied, "What for? I have Gwynplaine." She laid her head on Gwynplaine's shoulder, who was sitting behind and supporting her, his eyes wild with grief. "Oh," said she, "how happy I am!" Ursus took her wrist and counted the pulsations of the artery. He did not shake his head. He said nothing, nor expressed his thought except by the rapid movement of his eyelids, which were opening and closing convulsively, as if to prevent a flood of tears from bursting out. "What is the matter?" asked Gwynplaine. Ursus placed his ear against Dea's left side. Gwynplaine repeated his question, eagerly, fearful for the answer. Ursus looked at Gwynplaine, then at Dea. He was livid. He said, "We ought to be parallel with Canterbury. The distance from here to Gravesend cannot be very great. We shall have fine weather all night. We need fear no attack at sea, because the fleets are all on the coast of Spain. We shall have a good passage." Dea, bent and growing paler and paler, clutched her robe convulsively. She heaved a sigh of inexpressible sadness and murmured, "I know what this is. I am dying." Gwynplaine rose in terror. Ursus held Dea. "Die? You die? No, it shall not be. You cannot die. Die now, die at once. It is impossible. God is ferociously cruel. To give you and to take you back in the same moment. No, such a thing cannot be. It would make no doubt. It would make one doubt in him. Then, indeed, would everything be a snare. The earth, the sky, the cradles of infants, the human heart, love and stars. God would be a traitor, and man a dupe. There would be nothing in which to believe. It would be an insult to the creation. Everything would be an abyss. You know not what you say, Dea. You shall live. I command you to live. You must obey me. I am your husband and your master. I forbid you to leave me. Oh heavens, oh wretched man. No, I cannot be. It cannot be. To remain in the world after you. Why, it is as monstrous as that there should be no sun. Dea, recover. It is but a moment of passing pain. One feels a shudder at times and thinks no more about it. It is absolutely necessary that you should get well and cease to suffer. You! Die, what have I done to you? The very thought of it drives me mad. We belong to each other, and we love each other. We have no reason for going. It would be unjust. Here I committed crimes. Besides, you have forgiven me. Oh, you would not make me desperate. Have me become a villain, a madman, drive me to perdition. Dea, I entreat you, I conjure you. I supplicate you, do not die." And clenching his hands in his hair, agonized with fear, stifled with tears, he threw himself at her feet. "My Gwynplaine," said Dea, "it is no fault of mine." There then rose to her lips a red froth, which Ursus wiped away with the fold of her robe before Gwynplaine, who was prostrate at her feet, could see it. Gwynplaine took her feet in his hands, and implored her in all kinds of confused words. "I tell you I will not have it. I have no strength left to bear it. Die? Yes, both of us together, not otherwise. You die, my Dea, I will never consent to it. My divinity, my love, do you understand that I am with you? I swear that you shall live. Oh, but you cannot have thought what would become of me after you were gone. If you had an idea of the necessity which you are to me, you would see that it is absolutely impossible. Dea, you see, I have but you. The most extraordinary things have happened to me. You will hardly believe that I have just explored the whole of life in a few hours. I have found out one thing, that there is nothing in it. You exist. If you did not, the universe would have no meaning. Stay with me. Have pity on me. Since you love me, live on. If I have just found you again, it is to keep you. Wait a little longer. You cannot leave me like this, now that we have been together but a few minutes. Do not be impatient. Oh, heaven, how I suffer! You are not angry with me, are you? You know that I could not help going when the wapentake came for me. You will breathe more easily presently. You will see. Dea, all has been put right. We are going to be happy. Do not drive me to despair, Dea. I have done nothing to you." These words were not spoken, but sobbed out. They rose from his breast, now in a lament which might have attracted the dove, now in a roar which might have made lions recoil. Dea answered him in a voice growing weaker, and pausing at nearly every word. "Alas, it is of no use, my beloved. I see that you are doing all that you can. An hour ago I wanted to die. Now I do not. Gwynplaine, my adored Gwynplaine, how happy we have been. God placed you in my life, and he takes me out of yours. You see, I am going. You will remember the green box, won't you? And poor blind little Dea. You will remember my song? Do not forget the sound of my voice and the way in which I said I love you. I will come back and tell it to you again, in the night while you are asleep. Yes, we found each other again, but it was too much joy. It was to end at once. It is decreed that I am to go first. I love my father, Ursus, and my brother, Homo, very dearly. You are all so good. There is no air here. Open the window. My Gwynplaine, I did not tell you, but I was jealous of a woman who came one day. You do not even know of whom I speak. Is it not so? Cover my arms, I am rather cold. And Phoebe and Venus, where are they? One comes to love everybody. One feels a friendship for all those who have been mixed up in one's happiness. We have a kindly feeling towards them for having been present in our joys. Why has it all passed away? I have not clearly understood what has happened during the last 2 days. Now I am dying. Leave me in my dress. When I put it on, I foresaw that it would be my shroud. I wish to keep it on. Gwynplaine's kisses are upon it. Oh, what would I not have given to have lived on? What a happy life we led in our poor caravan. How we sang. How I listened to the applause. What joy it was never to be separated from each other. It seemed to me that I was living in a cloud with you. I knew one day from another, although I was blind. I knew that it was morning because I heard Gwynplaine. I felt that it was night because I dreamed of Gwynplaine. I felt that I was wrapped up in something which was his soul. We adored each other so sweetly. It is all fading away, and there will be no more songs. Alas, that I cannot live on. You will think of me, my beloved." Her voice was growing fainter. The ominous waning, which was death, was stealing away her breath. She folded her thumbs within her fingers, a sign that her last moments were approaching. It seemed as though the first uncertain words of an angel just created were blended with the last failing accents of a dying girl. She murmured, "You will think of me, won't you? It would be very sad to be dead and to be remembered by no one. I have been wayward at times. I beg pardon of you all. I am sure that, if God had willed it, we might yet have been happy, my Gwynplaine. For we take up but very little room, and we might have earned our bread together in another land. But God has willed it otherwise. I cannot make out in the least why I am dying. I never complained of being blind, so that I cannot have offended anyone. I should never have asked for anything, but always to be blind, as I was, by your side. Oh, how sad it is to have to part." Her words were more and more inarticulate, evaporating into each other as if they were being blown away. She had become almost inaudible. "Gwynplaine," she resumed, "you will think of me, won't you? I shall crave it when I am dead." And she added, "Oh, keep me with you." Then there was a pause, and she said, "Come to me as soon as you can. I shall be very unhappy without you, even in heaven. Do not leave me alone long, my sweet Gwynplaine. My paradise was here. Above there is no heaven. Oh, I cannot breathe. My beloved, my beloved." "Mercy!" cried Gwynplaine. "Farewell," murmured Dea, and he pressed his mouth to her beautiful icy hands. For a moment it seemed as if she had ceased to breathe. Then she raised herself on her elbows, and an intense splendor flashed across her eyes, and through an ineffable smile her voice rang out clearly. "Light!" she cried. "I see!" And she expired. She fell back rigid and motionless on the mattress. "Dead," said Ursus. And the poor old man, as if crushed by his despair, bowed his bald head and buried his swollen face in the folds of the gown which covered Dea's feet. He lay there in a swoon. Then Gwynplaine became awful. He arose, lifted his eyes, and gazed into the vast gloom above him, seen by none on earth, but looked down upon perhaps, as he stood in the darkness, by some invisible presence. He stretched his hands on high and said, "I come." And he strode across the deck towards the side of the vessel as if beckoned by a vision. A few paces off was the abyss. He walked slowly, never casting down his eyes. A smile came upon his face such as Dea's had just worn. He advanced straight before him as if watching something. In his eyes was a light like the reflection of a soul perceived from afar off. He cried out, "Yes." At every step he was approaching nearer to the side of the vessel. His gait was rigid. His arms were lifted up. His head was thrown back. His eyeballs were fixed. His movement was ghost-like. He advanced without haste and without hesitation, with fatal precision, as though there were before him no yawning gulf and open grave. He murmured, "Be easy. I follow you. I understand the sign that you are making me." His eyes were fixed upon a certain spot in the sky, where the shadow was deepest. The smile was still upon his face. The sky was perfectly black. There was no star visible in it, and yet he evidently saw one. He crossed the deck, a few stiff and ominous steps, and he had reached the very edge. "I come, Dea. Behold," said he. One step more. There was no bulwark. The void was before him. He strode into it. He fell. The night was thick and dull, the water deep. It swallowed him up. He disappeared calmly and silently. None saw nor heard him. The ship sailed on, and the river flowed. Shortly afterwards the ship reached the sea. When Ursus returned to consciousness, he found that Gwynplaine was no longer with him, and he saw Homo by the edge of the deck, baying in the shadow and looking down upon the water. The end. That's how the book ends. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. Wow, 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 wow. Okay, so I didn't think that I was actually predicting a Romeo and Juliet type ending. But here we are. Okay, so last chapter we have Dea who is so happy that she is actually dying again. I'm sure she's just sick. She's foaming right at the mouth, which, girl, calm yourself with the Kool-Aid. Far too much. Um, and she is dying. She's getting weaker and weaker and just like talking about like how excited and happy she is that Gwynplaine came back and all of these other things and that don't be afraid, blah blah blah. She's not afraid. And then the last thing that she says is that she can see. She like sits up straight and she's like, "Light. I see it," even though it's like the dead of night. So, and then she just dies. And then Gwynplaine, it appears that he like sees her, like sees a vision, sees Dea's ghost, whatever, but he's like talking and it sounds like he's answering. He's like, "Yes, I know what to do. I'll do this." And so he just like gets up and he almost in a trance just walks to the edge of the ship and then just goes into the water and the water just swallows him up. And while this is happening, Ursus is just so overcome with grief for the death of his daughter, Dea, and is just like sobbing and I guess passes out at her feet and doesn't see Gwynplaine leave. And when he wakes up, he notices that Gwynplaine is gone and the wolf is just standing at the edge of the ship, looking into the water. What an ending. So yeah, still upsetting. Still upsetting. What did we think of the overall book though? That's it. That's the end. What thoughts? I liked it. I think I mean, it feels almost like I could have done without all of the history and just been like, just tell me the story, Victor. All right, just tell me the story. What's going on? I don't need to know the history of the torture chamber in England. I don't need to know the history of taxation. I don't need to know that. Just tell me the story. Give me the goods. But at the same time, like it does have like a nice appreciation and brings like the real world into the story. And it's like, okay, so how much of this is fiction and how much of this is true? And so like having those real world context and history and being like, oh, okay, so I guess like that part's not so far-fetched. Oh, and that part like probably actually happened and that part definitely happened. And so like that's pretty cool. That was nice. It's a hefty book, a hefty story, and definitely a depressing one. Um, as mentioned before, Victor Hugo wrote this while he was banned from his home country for his political views and for his writing. He previously wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Les Miserables, and after even just reading like the like pre-chapters, you're like, oh yeah, I can see that. I can see why you were banned. You have very strong opinions and you are not afraid to use them. Not like don't, they're not hidden. They're not veiled in any way. Like there were a couple chapters where it's like, all right, this chapter we looked at a dead body. This whole chapter was us waking up in a room. Like things like that, which sometimes are nice and some of the like phrases that Victor threw on this page were beautifully crafted, but you're totally right. Like, I didn't need all of that extra stuff. I'm sure you're just trying to make me smart, and I thank you for that, Mr. Hugo. I thank you. Hmm. And I have heard that people were forced to read this book, like for school or like whatever, like it wasn't a choice. And I feel like anytime a book, especially a hefty book, is not your choice to read, is terrible. It's just terrible. Like you're not gonna like it because you're already being made to read something and it's just not gonna be enjoyable. So like the whole thing of like, this is the thing that I'm going to do, and I choose to do it. It's kind of cool and a little freeing and totally a different like vibe. I do this a lot. Oh my gosh. Okay. But yeah, I did like it. I think it's also one of those books that I feel like I'm going to be just like thinking about for a while. And it's going to be one of those books, much like Don Quixote, I feel like, that we're going to find other references to, not just in books and obviously in The Joker, but in other things, and to be like, oh, Victor Hugo did that. You're like behind. Or like just seeing like how the genre or how tropes have been translated to like modern works, I think is always interesting. What is left behind and what continues to prevail in lit is very cool. But that's it. I thought we were gonna go over time. So yeah, I do like this. I feel like I need to sit with my thoughts for a bit. And yeah, overall, very good. But yeah, I'll be back. I'll be back next time. We will start Wuthering Heights and it'll be great. But that's gonna be it for tonight. Thank you all so much for being here. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. If I do not see you next time, I hope to see you very soon. Have a good one. Goodbye.